the United States of America will have your back. We'll give you the strategy and the clear mission you deserve. We'll give you the equipment and support that you need to get the job done, and that includes public support back home. That is a promise that I make to you.
President Obama speaking today at Elmendorf Air Base in Alaska en route to an 8-day trip to Asia. In the last 24 hours, a rush of unexpected news, changing dramatically our understanding of what this new president will decide to do about the war that he inherited in Afghanistan. The Washington Post reporting that the administration's ambassador in Kabul, a former commanding general in our military effort there, has emerged now as a critic of plans to send more troops. The Associated Press reporting that the president himself rejected all 4 troop increase options presented to him by his national security team. The Washington Independent Spencer Ackerman today, quoting a National Security Council staffer, saying that after hearing of Ambassador Eikenberry's concerns about increasing troops, the president, quote, demanded an exit strategy for the war. The Secretary of Defense today saying the goal is to, quote, signal resolve and at the same time signal signal to the Afghans as well as the American people that this is not an open-ended commitment. The New York Times quoting an unnamed senior administration official today saying of the president, quote, he wants to know where the off-ramps are. And the White House press secretary today traveling with the president saying, quote, we have been there for 8 years and we're not going to be there forever. It's important to fully examine not just how we're going to get folks in, but how we're going to get folks out. Amid these signals that the president may be trying to find a way to put a period on the end of this war rather than an ellipses, an etc., a to be continued, the administration has made known that Gordon Goldstein's book about presidential decision-making in wartime, Lessons in Disaster, McGeorge Bundy and the Path to War in Vietnam, is required reading in this White House. What are Goldstein's lessons in disaster from Vietnam that are fresh in this president's mind as he's deciding what to do in his Asian land war? Well, 1, you should read the book. 2, you should listen to Gordon Goldstein, author of Lessons in Disaster, McGeorge Bundy, and the Path to War in Vietnam. He's also a former international security advisor to the United Nations. Mr. Goldstein, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me here.
Afghanistan obviously isn't Vietnam or Iraq or any other country for that matter. Do you think there are lessons from presidential decision-making on Vietnam that map to the decision-making about another war right now?
Well, one of the dramatic narratives that's at play today is we are watching how this president has taken command of the decision-making process. This reflects and correlates with a lesson that President Kennedy exemplified in 1961. Counselors advise, but presidents decide. In 61, Kennedy was encircled by his most senior advisors who urged him to make the first ground force troop deployment to South Vietnam. They said he had to send in up to 6 divisions or 200,000 men. But he was deeply skeptical about it. He doubted that it would be an effective mission. He had been burned at the Bay of Pigs. He told people that he would never be overawed by the advice of the military. So he decided himself what the strategy would be. And I think we see President Obama, particularly in the events of the past 24 hours, signaling that he is in command of this decision-making process.
When Kennedy was assassinated, forgive me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, Johnson kept much of JFK's national security team intact. Is it fair to say that those advisors gave roughly the same hawkish advice to both presidents, but that they each reacted to it quite differently?
It's an excellent point. In 1961, Kennedy received these proposals to Americanize the war. He declined them. In 65, Johnson received the same sorts of proposals. He acquiesced. Yeah. He was distant. He was too credulous in accepting his advisors' advice. He did not engage in a rigorous analytical process. And the result, of course, was a war that became a great tragedy for this country.
One of the things that I took away from Lessons in Disaster is to pay attention to how good the various players are at playing Washington. How much bureaucratic and political skill for the inside the White House debates that happen, inside the bureaucracy debates that happen, how much those different skill levels can explain whether or not people get their way. Was I right to take that from the book? And should we be looking now at how skillful the various players are who have these various views about Afghanistan?
The theme remains timeless from Kennedy and Johnson's era to today. In '61, when they were trying to impose this decision on Kennedy and, in essence, box him in, there was a series of stories leaked saying that he only had a few options and that they were escalation. Remarkably, a few days later, there were a series of stories from the president himself, citing unnamed White House sources, saying that no, there were other options, and that the president was disinclined to send in ground combat forces.
It's amazing. The parallels are amazing. Let me ask you about one other specific one. Ambassador Eikenberry is the frontline official dealing with President Karzai in Afghanistan. Seymour Hersh told us last night on this show that there have been concerns in our embassy in Afghanistan about Karzai's mental stability. I had never heard that, but I feel like Seymour Hersh generally has pretty good sources. Yeah. Maybe that's what's driving Eikenberry's leaked concerns about escalating the war. What did you learn from Vietnam about an ambassador or someone else in country upending what's going on in Washington from afar?
Well, this is again the source of another, I believe, rather remarkable parallel. In 1965, the American ambassador to South Vietnam was General Max Taylor. He had been Kennedy's senior military counselor, and he had been sent to Vietnam to observe that situation and advise the president. At that time, he was confronted with General William Westmoreland's proposal to send in the first ground combat forces, to liberalize the rules of engagement, and to really Americanize the war. And although he had he had supported doing that in 1961, in '65, Ambassador Taylor vehemently opposed it. Today, we have another general who had been the theater commander on the ground in Afghanistan, who is serving as our principal diplomat to that country, who has advised the president in a series of cables reportedly sent to him last week not to make this escalation. The parallel is extremely compelling.
The parallel is compelling, and when you say hindsight is 20/20, hey, we can use hindsight for what we're deciding now, thanks in part to your scholarship on this. Gordon Goldstein is the author of Lessons in Disaster, McGeorge Bundy and the Path to War in Vietnam. Congratulations on the influence of the book. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.